Here today, Zach-san demonstrating how to brew and serve Japanese green tea with a 4 types way. So before we actually started the demonstrations, we would like to know the relationship between water temperature and the taste of the tea. So here we have graph on the screen, and Zach-san, could you explain the graph and also the 4 significant point of brewing teas?
Sure. So in brewing Japanese tea, of course, it's important to think about the quality of the leaf, but also as important is the quality of the water that you use. So even before we get to the significant points of brewing tea, we want to think about the quality of the water. So the points to remember are soft filtered water is best for Japanese tea. That allows you to draw out both the color and the aroma, as well as the umami flavor. So when brewing the tea, you can control various aspects. I always joke that it's, working in restaurants and tea, you have much more of an influence on the flavor than, for example, opening a bottle of wine, because the work's been done, the wine's in the bottle. But with tea, you can really kind of share your feeling about the tea by how you brew it. So you can change the amount of water, the amount of tea leaf, you can change the temperature of the water, and then you can shorten or lengthen the brewing time. So those are really the 4 steps that you can influence how the tea is going to taste. And you can see on the graph here that depending on the temperature, you tend to to bring out various elements. So the hotter you are, the more fragrance you might get, but you might also get a little bit more of the astringency or bitterness. So teas like genmaicha and hojicha are best to be served at a hotter temperature of water. And then as you move towards teas that are more delicate and maybe more contain more umami, you're bringing that water temperature down. So for sencha, I think about 80 Celsius or 180 Fahrenheit for most sencha is very good. If you're drinking very high-grade sencha, you might want to bring that down a little bit more. And then, of course, for gyokuro, you can use much cooler water around 50 C or below. Do you want to say anything about water?
So this is really one of we often have this question by the customers. So I think the water, how important water, quality and temperature is something really we can keep mentioning to the customers. And also when we work with restaurants, the training is one of the things we really care about. So it's really important to affect to the tea taste, like how you steep, which type of tea water you use. So I think
yeah. And definitely with a restaurant, and being that it has such an influence on taste, I think being thoughtful about the water that you use and the temperature that you use is important. And for some reason, if you're not able to have so much control over the temperature, this graph really helps, because you can say, all right, our water is really hot. Maybe it's best to serve genmaicha or hojicha versus serving something like gyokuro. So
yeah, we often recommend each situation with each restaurant has
yeah, depending on their setup, what tea might be more successful for their restaurant.
Thank you very much. So now we actually are demonstrating 4 types of brewing styles. We have 4 styles today with Kyusu, which is Japanese teapot. Zach-san will explain a little bit later. And with tea server, Mizudashi, cold brew, and hot matcha. And today's with Kyusu, on your table, you have Kyusu and Yuzamashi and all other items on the table. So we will practice together.
So I wanted to discuss briefly about the Kyusu. So if you're not familiar, this is a Japanese Kyusu. This is a teapot with a side handle. So it's typically seen in Japan. The great point about it is it works with the motion of your wrist. So it's really quite easy to use. And you can see it has a lot of room inside. There's no strainer built in. The strainer is against the a spout here. So it allows the tea leaf to open up as well. And they're made from ceramic. So it does a nice job of absorbing heat. And over time, the more that you use the Kyusu, it'll actually have a beneficial impact on the flavor of your tea. So this is the Kyusu, and then you have a Uzamashi as well. Uzamashi is a device for cooling the water, but it can also be used for serving the tea into cups as well. And in my setup here, I'm going to use these 2 small teacups as well. And the leaf that we're going to brew today is sencha. So we have 6 grams. This is 6 grams of sencha here. And we're going to use roughly 180 cc's, which is in the range of about 6 ounces of hot water. But we don't want to use water that's right off of a boil. So you'll notice the water was poured into your Uzamashi first. The reason that we did that is to give it some time both to be exposed to air and cool down, but also the ceramic is going to absorb some of that heat as well. So I'm going to pour here into my Uzamashi just like yours, about 180 cc's. So if you want to take the top from your sencha, and you can take a look at the leaf, you can smell it as well. Has a really fresh, bright smell. Good Japanese green tea should be full of aroma. That's the first sign of freshness. So when you smell it, you can smell that fresh grassiness, almost a little bit of a toastiness as well. And when you look at the leaf, you can see how beautiful the color of the leaf is. So it's a very rich green, has a little bit of a sheen to it, which is a great sign. So again, this is 6 grams that we pre-measured. So we can take this and we can pour it into our empty Kyusu like that. If you do not have a thermometer, it can sometimes be challenging to understand if your water is ready to go. So one thing that you can do is you can feel the surface of the vessel that your water's in. Now, mine I can still feel is too hot because I can't really hold it. And also, if you look at the steam coming out from your Uzamashi, if it's coming straight up with a lot of force, that's a sign that the water temperature is probably over 90 or 95 Celsius. So you want to wait for the steam to kind of start drifting a little bit. That's a good sign that your water is cooling down.
Also, when you use ceramic cups, like you can also pour in the ceramic cup, and it has double meaning. So you can cool down the water, hot water, and also
preheat the cup. So in my case, I think with yours you're fine because it's been a little bit longer. I'm just going to pour this into my teacups like this. Now, if my water's too hot, I will do this just to cool it down a little bit further. And then, as Minami mentioned, when I brew the tea into these cups, they'll be preheated, so it keeps a nice stable temperature for your water. But in the case of you all, I think your water temperature is probably going to be close. So we'll just maybe give it another 30 seconds or so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pour the water over our tea leaves and put the lid back on, and we're only going to brew it for about 1 minute. Japanese tea, you don't have to brew for a very long time. And we're going to brew it actually directly back into your Uzamashi, and then we'll pour that into your cup from there. So I'm going to take mine here and put it back in now that it's cooled a little bit, like this. So if we're all ready, we can take our lid off. And we can take our hot water and just pour. I like to pour in a little bit of a circular motion. I can show you just to make sure that all the tea leaf is covered, like this. Kind of a nice, slow, rhythmic pour. Now, a couple points. If you have 1 cup or 1 Uzamashi, you can pour all of the contents into here and then either serve it into multiple cups, or if you're just pouring for yourself, you can drink right out of that cup. I'm going to show you also separately how to brew if you have more than 1 cup. So if you're making tea for yourself and for someone else, I recommend using what we call the 1-2 technique, which is pouring 1, 2, 1, 2. Or in the case if you have 3 cups, you can do 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. And what that does is it makes sure that the strength of the tea is the same in each cup. But for the sake of ease today, I believe that you're just only have 1 cup. So you can pour right back into your Uzamashi. So what we'll do is you can either hold it with your thumb and pour with one hand, or you can place your non-dominant hand like this. And in the case, you're going to go just gently into your Uzamashi. It's been about 1 minute. And if you'd like to watch, I'm just going to show you here the technique of brewing back and forth like this. So you can see this is great for multiple cups, but in your case, you can just pour directly. And you can see, can you see how I'm rocking it a little bit like this? When you're pouring, even if you're pouring into one, you can pour a little bit like this, and that rocking motion allows the water to wash over the tea, and you'll get a beautiful color. And then these last drops are very important, so we want to shake them out like this. And then when we're done, we can set our Kyusu down, and we just set the lid off to the side like this. And this allows any residual steam to come out. So if we do a second brew, it will be, the flavor will be more sweet. So take a look. Do they have teacups?
Yeah, there is the cup over there on the napkins.
Okay.
So after you pour to the yuzamashi, and then please pour to the cup and then taste it.
So last drip is very important for the next or second or third steep, because the tea leaf, if it still has a moist in the tea leaf, it kind of ruined while you are drinking the first steep.
Right. So you can see the color when you pour it into the cup. It should be rich, bright green. And if anyone has any feedback on the flavor, I'd love to hear some adjectives that you might use to describe it. You can also smell the leaf from the Kyusu. It's really nice to experience the smell of Japanese green tea.
If your tea is a little weak, probably the temperature, the reason can be like a water temperature could be a little too low, and the tea leaf we measure this time, so like a tea leaf can be a little too little.
Right, yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, those steps of how much leaf and how much water can really affect the outcome. But you go ahead.
Sorry, and the steeping time.
Correct, yeah. So with sencha, generally speaking, about a minute. Depending, it can change slightly. So yeah, you can think of kind of a rule of thumb being, I believe there's instructions that you might have in your
Brochure?
In your brochure. You can follow along with that. But I think that for one person, that's a nice serving. And then the charm of Japanese tea is you can add water again, and you can do a second steep and sometimes even a third steep. So the value of Japanese green tea is very high because you can drink it over multiple steeps as well.
Thank you very much. So now we are moving on to the second one with tea servers. So Zach-san will demonstrating how to brew with tea servers.
So the reason we wanted to show this method is sometimes in restaurant settings you might not have the perfect amount of teapots, or you might not have a teapot at all. So we wanted to kind of show you a quick and easy way to brew tea without if you don't have a teapot. So in this case, I'm just going to use a spouted bowl like this. This is a katakuchi or a large yuzamashi. Sometimes you might not even have that. So you could literally use a bowl. Imagine this doesn't have a spout. You can use a bowl, and you can use one of these, a strainer or a sieve. This one is specifically for Japanese green tea, but certainly you could use anything that you have. So in this case, I'm just going to take my tea leaf, and I'm going to put them directly into the bowl like so. And I'm going to take the water here, and same as before, I'm going to cool it slightly because in this case I'm making sencha. So I'm going to measure my water into another yuzamashi, or in the case if you don't have one, you can use a cup, you could use a bowl, just something to kind of take a little bit of the heat off. And then I'm going to pour this over the tea leaves like so. And now it's brewing just as it would in the Kyusu, but of course there's no strainer. So after we wait the minute, we're going to use the strainer here, like externally. We can just hold that right over the vessel that we're pouring into. It will catch the tea leaf, and then we can distribute the tea. The biggest point to remember when brewing Japanese tea is you want the leaf to have as much room to open up as possible. That way the color and the aroma and the flavor will come out. So sometimes people brew Japanese green tea in like a small tea ball or an inserted strainer that's very narrow. Unfortunately, with those, you don't get the much of the flavor because the tea is kind of like, packed together and it doesn't release the flavor. So actually, I love brewing in a bowl like this because it allows the tea to really open up. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to pour it through Same rocking motion as before, just like this. The last drops are very important, so I'm going to So now I'm going to take the tea here, and if I'm serving for 2 people, now that all the tea has been blended into one yuzumashi, I can just pour 1 and 2. And if it's a restaurant setting, you can actually leave it here, and they can serve themselves when they're finished. So that's the method. I think that's kind of like a back of house trick if you're not in a position with a teapot. So that's why we included that.
Thank you so much. So the third one is brewing the Mizudashi, which is cold brew.
So Mizudashi just refers to a style of tea where you're using cold water to extract the flavor. You can do it with coffee as well. There's a style of Mizudashi coffee. You're basically extracting flavor with a longer duration. So you can do it with multiple types of tea. Yep, no problem. And it's a really fun way, especially if you live in LA, I guess you can do it all year around here. In New York, we love doing it in the summer because it's quite refreshing. And then I think Matsumoto-san is going to talk about this, but it's a really beautiful way to serve tea. You can use stemware, or you can use different types of serving vessels that accentuate the color and the flavor. And also having the temperature be cold, it's kind of a surprising experience for those who maybe have never had it before. So I think Mizudashi is a great tool for restaurants. It's also something that can be made in advance, meaning you can batch brew it, and then you can allow it to brew overnight, and you can make a larger format and then serve it. You can serve it to your guests quite easily from a carafe like this. Also quite easy to brew. You can use 2 vessels like this. This is cold, soft, purified water, and you can put your leaf directly into a carafe like this. The thing that it requires is time. So we're not going to actually brew it all right now because this would then need time to brew, duration, but I can show you the steps to do it. So in this case, we're going to use a hojicha. So we would take the appropriate amount, and that can really vary depending on the tea that you're using. In the case of hojicha, I'm going to use about 10 grams to 300 cc's of cold water. But you can adjust that depending so that you can make a larger format. So we're just going to take it like this. And can you see the color of this leaf? You see how this is much darker than the sencha? This is the roasted green tea hojicha. And now it's quite easy. I'm just going to take the cold water here, pour it directly over the tea leaf. And you want to do your best to try and cover as much of the tea as possible with the water, but over time it will absorb and it will sink to the bottom. And now you can put a cover on this, put it into the refrigerator and allow it to sit. With this volume here, this isn't that much. I think if you brewed this for probably 3 to 4 hours, it would be sufficient. But for a larger format, I think going up to 12 hours is great. So this is quite easy to use. You can just strain it. And then it typically holds, depending on the tea, about 2 to 3 days in the refrigerator, so long as you keep it away from light. And that's a really easy way to brew the tea cold. Another way you can do is you can brew it hot and pour it over ice, but I think the length of brewing really adds a sweetness and a dimension that you don't get with brewing hot.
Thank you very much. So the last one is how to make hot matcha.
So how many people here have whisked matcha before? Has anyone here made matcha? Make it at home? Yeah? So it's probably the style of tea we get the most questions about. So what I thought today, we could just go over quickly how to make a traditional bowl of usucha. Usucha is the style of matcha that most people are familiar with. It's whisked into a fine froth. Do you have guests at the restaurant who are familiar with matcha? Many guests, or still not so much?
It's not so much.
Not so much, okay.
Truly matcha. So like matcha latte, cocktail, they know that.
Right, they more know, yeah. He's saying they're more familiar with matcha latte rather than matcha this way. So the tools we want to use to create matcha are very traditional but quite important. So I think the most important is this. We have a chasen. So a chasen is a piece of bamboo that's been it's been cut into a very specific pattern, and we use that to whisk the matcha. And then a type of bowl like this. This is a chawan. You can also use a spouted bowl if you want to serve it to multiple people. So in the case of this, I'm going to take this and I'm actually just going to put a little hot water in it like this. Could I get the Uzamashi just to dump the thanks? So I just want to preheat the bowl a little bit and make sure that if there's any impurities in there, dust, things like that, it cleans them out. I can do this. Okay. So now the matcha powder is here. I'm going to take this. And if you want to write this down, I think ideally a bowl of usucha, we're looking at 2 grams of matcha to about 60 to 65 cc's of water, hot water. Okay, so one important thing as well is to sift the matcha. So high quality matcha powder, because it's milled, it's very fine and it can create clumps by static electricity. So I'm going to take this here, this strainer, and I'm going to take the chashaku here and just scoop this, about 3 scoops, which is roughly 2 grams. Like this. I'm going to go ahead and sift it like this. So this step looks like it could be skipped, but it actually makes a very, very big difference in the outcome because, as I mentioned, matcha is such a fine powder that it can sometimes, even after you whisk it, the static electricity that is bonding the pieces together doesn't always come out. Right. Okay. So now I'm going to take my water and I'm going to use about 2 ounces or about 60 to 65 cc's, and I'm just going to go from the edge like this. It's generally less water than people think. You don't need to use that much water. And I'm going to take now the whisk here. And the important thing is when we're working with a chawan or any type of Japanese teaware, we want to show it respect and make sure that we're taking care of the piece that we're working with. So I'm going to use my hand here to make sure that I'm supporting the bowl while I whisk. And then my dominant hand, I'm right-handed, I'm going to go ahead and use the whisk to whisk the matcha. So first thing we want to do is just work any of the water and the clumps together like this. And then we're going to use a Z pattern. And we want to use as much of the bowl as possible. We don't want to just be in the center. We actually want to really get the RPMs up. And I want you to just listen. So you can hear the whisk is touching the bottom of the bowl and it's making that sound. So for the first 10, 15 seconds, we're going to do that. Now I'm going to move to the top. And you hear now, you don't hear that, right? Very quiet, because I'm just going over the surface. And I'm working out any of the larger bubbles, and I'm getting a really super fine, kind of almost like a crema. If you think of, a bowl, or excuse me, a nice shot of espresso that comes out of the machine. It's got that beautiful crema on top. So just like that. And then I'm just going to pull it out. And now we have our matcha. So it's a pretty quick and easy way. It does take a little bit of practice over time to do it, but once you do, I think serving your customers something like that is going to be great for them, and it's always great to promote the true flavor of matcha as well.